We have breaking news to begin. Canadians are among a growing group of women who are coming forward this morning to allege they were sexually assaulted by the UK billionaire whose son died with Princess Diana. You'll likely recognize Mohamed Al-Fayed in this photo. He died last year, into his 90s when he passed away, the one-time owner of Harrods, London's renowned luxury department store. Al-Fayed was the father of Dodi Al-Fayed, who was in a relationship with Princess Diana when they were both killed in that Paris car crash. His father memorialized them at Harrods and pushed a disproven conspiracy theory that Diana and Dodi were murdered. Well, Mohamed Al-Fayed is now being accused of rape and sexual assault by dozens of women who worked at Harrods. CBC News has learned 3 of them are Canadian. One was a teenager at the time. And this morning, their legal team is speaking out.
I have many years of practice, and I have never seen a case as horrific as this. We will say it plainly, Mohamed Al-Fayed was a monster. But he was a monster enabled by a system that pervaded Harrods.
The lawyers for the survivors allege Al-Fayed was the top of a long-running system of grooming, sexual assault, and spying on young women at Harrods. Details about the allegations are graphic, and you may find them disturbing. I want to warn you in advance. We're going to bring in Crystal Gamansing now from London. She was there for the news conference, listened to it all herself, and is here with us to tell us more about the victims and what they are alleging, and the Canadian victims as well. Crystal, what did you hear?
Well, Heather, we heard some pretty graphic, detailed information about the alleged abuses. In one case, one of the alleged victims sat up at the front here at Kent House where the press conference was held, and she shared her experiences. It's worth noting there were more than a dozen alleged victims who attended today's press briefing at one point to protect the identity of those individuals, because not all of them have, decided to become public and share their faces and their names. So at one point when these people streamed into the room, all of the cameras, it was a packed press conference, all agreed to, suppress their identity by raising up their camera lenses to the sky so that no one would be able to capture any of the faces of the alleged victims. One of the victims was very powerful, Natasha. She talked about being a young woman, how working at Harrods, the world-famous department store, was her dream job. And when she got it, she thought that she had a passport for her that would line her future. And what she ended up experiencing, she says, was just absolutely horrific and tragic, being assaulted. But it didn't just end there, Heather. She talked about how it then became threatening, how women were surveilled, how they were manipulated into being silent. Take a listen to some of the things that she shared at the press briefing.
Just laughed at me. He then composed himself, and he told me in no uncertain terms that I was never to breathe a word of this to anyone. If I did, I would never work in London again, and he knew where my family lived.
So Natasha there explaining what her interaction with the late Mohamed Al-Fayed was after she says she was assaulted. The legal team here detailed that they are moving forward with civil cases, and they were encouraging any other victims to come forward. At this point, they have been retained by more than 37 women from around the world, ex-employees who were in Malaysia, Australia, the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. You mentioned the 3 Canadian alleged victims who are joining this suit. Now, Mohamed Al-Fayed had passed away last year, so he's obviously never been held accountable for any of these allegations, won't be able to be tried. But the legal team is saying that Harrods has a responsibility and that there must be meaningful accountability. I'm going to let you hear directly from Barrister Dean Armstrong.
Why the focus on Harrods? I'll tell you the focus on Harrods and the reason for that. This was systematic trafficking of women for sexual gratification.
We heard there the reason for focusing on Harrods. One of the other things that we heard at this press conference that people will be able to recall and sort of put this in a bit of context is the lawyers say this is on par with what we saw in the Jeffrey Epstein case, in the Harvey Weinstein case. They say this is widespread, systematic abuse, attacking vulnerable women who had little recourse, and they are saying that it was allowed to happen and perpetrated by a powerful man. Heather?
It's so interesting when you mention those two, Weinstein and Epstein. One of the people who was at that table today, and I know we're going to hear from her in a momentary, who was involved in those cases, is also a part of the legal team in this one as representing the global nature of this case. And we'll hear her in connection with what she's asking for from Harrods, this meaningful accountability. What is Harrods saying about that, Crystal?
Yeah, the lawyers obviously saying they want meaningful accountability, as you just mentioned. That's also what we're, hearing from the alleged victims. It's important to mention that Harrods came out with an original statement after the BBC documentary aired last night. I reached out to Harrods as well, knowing that there were 3 Canadians that would be involved in this sort of global civil legal case that is underway. So I'm just going to read you the press release just to make sure we have this right, because it's important. Harrods says they are utterly appalled by the allegations against Mohamed Al-Fayed. They condemn them in the strongest terms, admitted that we failed our employees who were his victims and sincerely apologize. And they are again telling people to go towards a procedure they put in place for current and former employees back in 2023 when more attention was starting to be given to these allegations. So they were encouraging any possible victims to contact them and go through this settlement process instead of taking legal procedures, what they say can take a long time. Now, with that said, you had mentioned one of the biggest names in women's rights and legal cases, Gloria Allred. She was here today, and she was encouraging other women to come forward, saying they are building a house of courage brick by brick. And this is what she had to say to Harrods.
It is not enough for Harrods to now say that they are sorry. It is not enough to acknowledge that Harrods failed these women. Justice demands that the victims receive meaningful accountability for what they have suffered.
Allred also mentioning that she has been involved with cases in the past that have gone through the civil system and have resulted in the women feeling heard and having meaningful justice. They are quick to point out that meaningful justice does not always mean a cash settlement, that none of the 37 victims that they've been in contact with, alleged victims that they've been in contact with, have brought up the question of money, that it is more about them being able to share their story, to be empowered, and to have people understand the trauma that they say they've been experiencing, in some cases for decades. At this point, no actual lawsuit has been filed. They say it is in the works because there are so many alleged victims and they're living all over the world.
Crystal, thank you very much. Crystal Gulmansing in London.